I'm Sherry Kendall, and welcome to Hometown Salutes. Today I have my good friend and Fayette County veteran, Mike Bishop. Welcome, Mike, to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What branch of service were you in, and did you enlist, or were you drafted?
Well, I graduated from Brookville High School in 1964, and as soon as I graduated, I went to work at Roots. And one afternoon I come home and my mother was sitting on the front porch and she had her head in her hands, and I knew something was wrong. And I had received my draft notice in October of '65. And instead of going ahead and being drafted, I went ahead and joined the Air Force because I was following suit after my big brother. And that was in October of '65, and I left in January 5th of '66. I spent 6 to 8 weeks in basic training, and then we had jungle training, self-defense training, and then I spent another 3.5 months in tech school learning what we were going to do, what we're supposed to do. And then they cut my orders, and I got assigned to Okinawa in the Southeast Asia. So I come home for 20 days, and I left, and we landed in Okinawa in April of '66. I think I got that right. And when I stepped off of that aircraft, that's the time for the monsoons to start over there. And when I stepped off of that aircraft, it was just like putting an anvil around your neck. The air was so heavy, and it was just pouring down rain, and but we got off, and we got assigned where we was going to stay, and there was no rest period. As soon as we got off the aircraft, we were sent to where we were going to stay, and we went to work the next day. And they worked us anywhere from 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. And basically, Okinawa, for folks that don't know, is the biggest supply hub for the whole entire Southeast Asia. For anything that comes in supply manner, that's where it comes first from the United States.
Oh, wow.
And when I got there, they were having trouble with the Okinawans, and there was 5 ships backed up in the harbor full of supplies for the military, basically. And that was all stuff, items, and different things that had to go through our system and then be distributed to wherever it was going, and 95% of it was going to Nam. So like I said, they worked us anywhere from 10 to 12, 14 hours a day. We worked 7 days, got 1 day off, 7 days, got 1 day off. And I would suggest that if people don't know about Okinawa, get on the computer and look it up, because what it looks like today is completely different than what it looked like back in '66 when I was over there. The island's 67 miles long and 12 miles wide. And after you've been there for a while, you know where every crook and cranny is, because there's nothing to do, really. And after we got assigned that what we had to do, that base itself sits on 11,000 square acres.
Wow.
And there's 2 12,000-foot runways, and they are busy constantly. To my recollection, there was only one time that there was complete silence, and they put by the way, this was my first Christmas away from home, and that was pretty rough, let me tell you. And I'm sure a lot of the people, guys and girls that's been in, I'll tell you, the first 4 or 5 months is tough. I didn't really get homesick, but they put a huge big Christmas star up on one of the radar antennas, and they shut everything down for 1 minute and played Silent Night.
Aww.
And as soon as the last note was hit, the roar started up.
Everything came back.
Everything came back. And I saw a lot of things that I don't particularly like to talk about, but it was a very busy place, but not near as dangerous as our boys and girls that was further south than me that was in the actual war. But we played an important part in that because we had 4 fighter squadrons and 2 huge supply squadrons of fuel in the KC-135s, the refuelers. And we had several helicopters and what have you. And 70% of that island was Quonset hut's storage full of supplies. And I spent 18 months over there, and I came home in February of '67 because I just had to get away from there. I mean, it was just, like I said, there's just nothing to do. But again, I wasn't dodging bullets and carrying a gun, except they did issue us weapons several times when the Okinawans didn't get their way. They would strike, they would quit working, anything. And one factor I'd like to point out was that was in '66, and that wasn't very long after we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. So
Oh, yeah.
there was so much evidence of what happened to those people when we dropped the bomb, because they migrated up from Hiroshima to Okinawa, Guam, the Philippines, and what have you. And they hated us for that. They hated, you couldn't trust them. I mean, if you laid a pencil or a watch down and turned your head, it was gone when you turned back. But I got along with them. I managed to do my thing, and as I told you earlier in our conversation, after I was over there for about 4 months, I got to know a lot of people in different places, a lot of pilots, a lot of commanders, and I had a key. I was a squad leader, by the way, and I had a key to every Quonset hut on that base except the one where the high security radar equipment was at. I couldn't get in there. And all hours of the day and night, whether I was on duty or not, if they couldn't get what they needed, they'd call me. And some of that stuff was, we had to store outside, like their fuel tanks and whatever extra that could be stored outside, we stored outside. And to go outside in one of those monsoons with the wind blowing 60 miles an hour on a high-low, you may have to go get a rudder or a wing, half of a wing, or what have you. That habu grass is just like razors. And the snakes are deadly. Snails were as big around as saucers. You walk on them, it's like walking on eggshells. And but the snakes were very dangerous, as I'm sure the guys can tell you that. We're down south because they was in a lot more than we were. But I've had a lot of thoughts about it, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. I would.
Yeah. So what exactly was your job over there?
My job was, I had, like, I don't remember exactly the number. I had probably maybe 15 guys that worked for me. And our job was, when the supplies come in, we broke them down, put them where they needed to be, categorized them. And of course, back then the computers was, you
Right.
done it all on paper, hard paper. And it was my job to see that the right part got at the right place at the right time. And we had those little 40 Econolines. A lot of people don't remember those, but they had a bed on them instead of like a van. And there's been many a time that I've been out at midnight or later, crawled up on top of that van and handed a part through the window of the aircraft to the pilot, because
Yeah.
a lot of the pilots could fix minor problems themselves. But most of the missions were flown out, if I have my information right, I think most of the missions were flown out of Thailand, and they would bring what was left of an aircraft or a refuel or the wounded or what have you back to us. And our guys repaired them and got them ready, and then they would send them back. And there's a Marine base on the Okinawa, there's an Army base, and of course the Navy was in and out all the time. And one thing that was really interesting is I met two of my hometown boys while I was over there. I met a gentleman by the name, he lives in Brookville, his name is Bill Ellis. I was walking down the street, and he's about as tall as I am, and I saw this guy coming, and I thought, boy, he looks familiar. And we graduated together.
Yeah.
And he's still alive. He worked at Vistion with me. And then I saw another gentleman who just recently passed. I won't mention his name, but we grew up together. And he was in the Marines, and he was in there on R&R, and we got to spend some home time just talking. You don't realize how much you miss your hometown until you've been away from it for a while, like 6 months, and you see somebody you know, and it's just like a
sure.
reunion, you know. It's very, very rejoicing, I guess.
I'm sure. So when you left your training here in the States, how did you get over there?
With military aircraft.
Aircraft?
Yes, ma'am.
And so did you ever engage with the enemy?
No, ma'am. nope. It was, I tried, after, I don't know if maybe I said this already, but after I was over there about 7 months, I applied to go TDY, which temporary duty,
Okay.
to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base in Saigon. And they would not let me go because my older brother, I only have one brother, was gone, and I was the only living son at home and a living child in the military at home. So they would not let me go. I even bumped it up to the base commander, and it's just a no-no. They wouldn't let me go. So I spent the entire 18 months there. That's why I had to come home, because I had to get away from it for a while. It was just, you can't do very much on an island like that, let me tell you.
Right. So is there any close encounters that you'd want to talk about?
Well,
You had several.
I've got a broken nose 2 times, if that tells you anything. And yeah, there was several incidents that between the Okinawans and us. I mean, they just didn't like us. Period. They worked for the military. I had a number, and I apologize how many Okinawans actually worked for Uncle Sam. But they had eyes and ears everywhere. There was a deal where an SR-71 was supposed to come in, which is a super reconnaissance plane. It looks like a big long, just a black thread, and it can go like 40,000 feet in the air. And they brought it in at night, and I was on duty. They turned the runway lights on just long enough to get it landed. No Okinawans was allowed around it within 100 yards because the SPs was everywhere. We got it in the hangar, shut the doors, and the next morning it was in the Okinawa newspaper. They'd gotten pictures of it. And it was supposed to be top secret because it was over there on its first really recon mission that was really important for something to do with the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And needless to say, the cat was out of the box, so there wasn't nothing we could do about it. And we just let it go. I mean, we didn't even have to try to hide it when it took off. I say we, but the pilots did.
Right.
We just opened the door and away it went. But that thing could fly. I mean, it was up. It was gone before you could blink your eye. That's how fast it could fly.
Golly. So what kind of orders were you given when you were over there? I mean, I'm sure you had several orders, but...
First order was sleep with one eye open. Second order was watch your back. If you in any way offend an Okinawa, it was called the Ryukyu Islands because there's several islands around Okinawa. And if you in any way offended them, it was an automatic court-martial and a 1 stripe.
Really?
Yes, ma'am. And do your job, do it well, because what you're doing saves many lives down south. I mean, many thousands of airstrikes. But again, all the credit goes to the guys that was on the ground that fought this war, and I just respect them and I praise them. And I would have won if they would have let me, but that was as far as I could go south.
Yeah. So how did you feel when you were there? I mean, were you scared, nervous?
Well, I wasn't scared because I mean, I was cautious. Let's put it that way. You had to be cautious. But I mean, they worked us. I worked on a farm all my life, and I thought, this is going to be a piece of cake. And then when I seen what they had us doing and what we had to do, and I mean, it was nonstop, because like I told you earlier, those 5 ships, they were freighters like you see on the modern day movies. They didn't have the big semi-trailers on them, but they were in boxes and stacked, and I can remember several times big, huge containers just might have one item in it. Like one that comes to mind had 10,000 one size wrench in it, 10,000 of them. And that was just one example of, I mean, we got everything from the kitchen sink to laundry to, set up housing over there, because there was a lot of guys brought their wives. They had off-base housing. It wasn't very nice. It wasn't very appropriate. I mean, if I would have been married, then I would have never taken my spouse over there, because the first thing, it was too dangerous. But there was like I said, it was the main supply hub for the Far East, so there was everything come through there, but you could name it. I mean, just everything that you needed to run a household with, or or rebuild an aircraft with from the ground up.
Wow. So a typical day for you started what time, and like how would your day go?
It depended. It was a SAC base, which stands for Strategic Air Command. That means we was on alert 24/7, and they rotated us. We would sometimes we would work from dark to or daylight to dark, and sometimes we'd work dark to daylight. And we done that to just rest the troops, so they didn't get burnt out too bad. But it was just a lot of physical work. Of course, we had high-lows and we had cranes, and because some of that stuff you just couldn't manhandle. I mean, aircraft wings for the fighters. We had F-4C Phantoms. We had 102s and 101s and 105s, and that's been almost 60 years ago. So excuse me if I can't remember everything, but.
Well, mentally, I mean, you had to be exhausted mentally and physically.
You were tired. When you went to bed, you slept. But the other problem was, it really was bad, was the monsoons. When they came in, you had to keep a light burning. If you was fortunate enough to get a locker, you had to put a light bulb in it because the mold would grow overnight. And you always, when you rolled your bunk back, you always rolled it back and didn't just jump in it. You rolled every cover back to make sure there wasn't a snake in it because they were so bad. And and they had random inspections, and you could go that day. You could be prepared for it when you left that morning and come back to go through with the commander, and your shoes would have mold in them. Your fatigues would have mold in them. The walls would have mold on it. You just had to, because it was just so damp and rainy and nasty. And when that monsoon season came in, I've seen water spouts just take an aircraft and just twirl it like a twirl, just like this on the runways, and just blow it all to pieces. I mean, lift it right off the ground. And they lasted usually from, matter of fact, it's about time for them to start now if our environment hasn't changed too much. And they usually lasted up until July.
Oh.
The bad part about it was you never knew when one was coming in other than what the radar told us. So we had to be prepared all the time.
So do they have seasons over there?
Oh, yeah. It's not very pleasant. I mean, we always kept we called it a bladder of water hanging in the middle of the barracks where we were at in case we ran out of water. But we've eaten sea rations many, many a time because we lost all power. They had two big ships on one end of the island that there was nothing but just a big floating generator, and that's what supplied the power to that whole island. Was the generator on that ship. And when we lost power, it was bad. It wasn't down very long, I can tell you that much, because we just couldn't afford to not let whatever was scheduled to fly out had to go. And there was always one extra aircraft. If there was 5 to go out, there was 6 over there in case one of them dumped in the ocean, which I've seen many times happen. And that's all I'd like to say about that.
Yeah. So what are some life lessons that you learned from your time in the military?
This is just my personal opinion because I know a lot of mothers and probably fathers are going to disagree with me, but I would recommend that every young man enlist in the military. I would, for the simple fact that it teaches you so many things. It teaches you self-discipline. It teaches you how to be secure. It teaches you how to survive. It teaches you how to be a man and a person. It teaches you manners, teaches you respect, trust, and I swore that if I lived long enough, I was going to beat the crap out of my drill instructor because I hated him so bad. But it was his job to do what he did to prepare us for wherever we went.
Yeah,
and
they tear you down. I mean, you're just, how old?
I was
18?
19. I just turned 19.
Yeah.
That's just, face it, that's just a very young man.
Yeah.
That's a senior graduating.
Sheesh. To think what you saw and what you had to do, it's crazy. So go back to the beginning. So you did come from a military family?
Well, my dad was in the Army during World War II, and I don't really know where he served at. I don't know if he was overseas or what, because all records have been lost. He died in '63, and then...
Did he die in the service?
No, he was.
Okay.
He just had we don't know what killed him. He worked at that Fernald plant.
In Ohio?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
And that was a very, very restricted plant. And if I knew back then what I know now, I'd be a millionaire. Me and my brother both, because we'd have sued the pants off of him, because we're rested assured that's what took his life. And then my brother, he got drafted in, and he went ahead and joined the Air Force. And like I said, he wasn't in there very long, maybe 2 years. I don't remember how long. And he had an accident, and the wind blew him off an airplane wing and crushed his ankle. So he got a medical discharge. And so back then, you just wanted to kind of follow in your family's footsteps, you know.
Sure.
And that's what I elected to do. My grandfather was a veterinarian, and that's what I wanted to be. And then when I lost my dad, my whole world got turned upside down. And then when I got drafted, it was even worse.
Oh, your poor mom.
Yeah, she was a mess, that's for sure. When they come to get me, it wasn't a pleasant scene, let me tell you.
So how did they come get you? How?
They brought a 19, I forget what it was, long blue Ford station wagon.
Geesh.
And I lived in Metamore up on top of 229. And they took me to Indianapolis and that to the airport, and then that's where it all started coming together. And we flew from there to Lackland Air Force Base, spent my basic there, then went to Amarillo to take my training, and then come home, and then went to Okinawa. And then after Okinawa, I went to the epitome of the world. They reassigned me to Jacksonville, Arkansas Air Force Base, and that was awful.
How long were you there?
At which place?
At Arkansas.
I was there from November of '67 to May of '69. I got let's see, 7 months early out, something like that, because Nam was so hot, and Westmoreland was just flooding it with troops, just flooding it more and more and more. And one thing I forgot to tell you, when I got drafted, you know, all the kids, that was the big Beetle regime then.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The Beatles was the hottest thing going, and of course I had on a pair of Beetle boots, peg pants, a tie-down shirt, and I had on a black overcoat. And when we got down there and got assigned to our barracks, we had to do our basic training the first almost 3 weeks in our civilian clothes because they didn't have any military supplies for us. That's how hot Nam was getting supplies over to them.
Wow.
And you try to march in Beetle boots, I had some pretty good sized blisters.
So everybody just stayed in their clothes?
Yes, ma'am. Wash and wear. That's what we done for about 2.5, 3 weeks. And then we got our fatigues and our boots and our coats and what have you. And that wasn't, I mean, some of them guys really sweat, man. It got pretty raunchy there for a while.
Oh, that is hysterical. Huh. So were you able to keep in touch with any of your military buddies?
Up until about 5 years ago, and I haven't heard from either one of them. I had 3, and one of them's since passed, and the other one's very, very ill right now, and he's never been back in contact with me. And the last one was he was a meteorologist in the military. He laid out the whole grid for the Indianapolis airport when they put the new airport in about 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years ago. He laid that whole grid out. That was his job.
Wow.
And he went back to Okinawa because he was over there with me. We spent 18 months together. He went back over there with his job about 3 years ago, and he brought some pictures back, and he said, Mike, you wouldn't believe it. He said, it's a city now. And when we was over there, it was nothing but mud, and just around the barracks was asphalt, but once you got down to where the warehouse was gravel, and but again, it was nothing compared to what our boys went through down south. It wasn't, but I did my part.
Oh, it was bad all the way around. I mean, everybody. So when you came back, did you get treated bad?
When I came back on leave, and we landed in Los Angeles. And when I got off the aircraft and got out of the security, they bombarded us with everything you could think of, from eggs to tomatoes to cabbage to lettuce to anything. Books, newspapers, beer cans, pop bottles. They called us baby killers, and you got no business over there, come home. And then when I got to Arkansas, I had to do a drill for a funeral. And I didn't volunteer for it. I got picked for it, and the honor guard. And when we got done, they done us the same way there. Man, I was really hot over that one because we was burying a veteran, and they done us that way. But there's been thousands of guys that got done the same way. It was awful. And for guys like me, I had no choice. I got drafted. It either go or go to jail.
Right.
And so it was just a political war that should have never been.
Right. And
58,000 plus guys never came back, and it's just so sad. It really is. I can't hardly bear to think about it because it's just such a waste.
yeah. And nobody, I mean, you didn't have a choice. I mean, you
No,
had to
ma'am.
do what you were
I
told to
didn't.
do. That's sad. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your family?
Well, my wife is Vonda Bishop Ministries, and she travels a lot, and we've been married going on 38 years, and we have 3 children between us and 5 grandchildren. And I'm retired from Fort Vistian. I was the production manager over Radiator. And of course, I served downtown here for 12 and a half years on the city council, on Board of Works. And I retired in 2001 after 30 years, and the day before my retirement was effective, I blew 2 discs in my back, and they've never healed since. So I've dealt with that for 20-some
gosh.
years. But I'm blessed. I don't complain about it because I can just look around the corner and someone's got it worse than I do. So I just deal with it
Right.
every day. I get bored because I was always a hustler and a go-getter, and when I done this, my days it was just like running into a brick wall. Everything stopped. And I
Wow.
just can't, I mean, it's hard to live this way, but I stay positive.
Right.
God's taking care of me. That's all that matters.
That's right. That's right. And Vonda Bishop Ministries, they do a lot for here in Connersville, especially our youth.
We done.
I mean, the Christmas is unreal.
This past Christmas, she done, I think, 270 children. Plus, we just took a lot of food down to one of the centers for the homeless. And she's all the time helping people. I mean, and I try to help her as much as I can, but she's been doing that now for almost 20 years.
Really?
Yes, ma'am. Matter of fact, she's leaving tomorrow for a big seminar down in, where did she say she was going? I've lost my mind. Virginia, I believe.
Wow.
No, Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay. Wow. Well, you guys really do a lot here in Fayette County. Is there anything else you want to share before we sign off?
Nothing other than I would just encourage all the veterans out there to come and do this. Let people know. I mean, you don't have to talk about the parts that you don't like to talk about because I didn't. But come and do this just for your own self-recognition. It was a bad time to be going, and if you made it back, thank God, and share that story like I'm doing. It's just, I felt like I needed to do it, so I done it.
I loved having you on.
Thank you.
And I can't thank you enough for your service and your sacrifice. I appreciate you coming on, telling your story.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Well, be sure to tune in next month for another edition of Hometown Salutes.